And so you got yourself into the korg Volca rabbit hole. You're watching hours of videos on YouTube trying to figure out which one does what, and spending sleepless nights trying to figure out which one to get first. Well, let me just save you some time. It's the korg Volca sample 2, no question. What is up, greedy guts? It's your boy Big Umami, and this is 2 ways to turn your korg Volca sample 2 into a synth, or why this is the king of all korg Volcas. So you just watch a cool video of a cool dude playing a full song, or maybe a full entire set on the damn thing, and you convince yourself that you want one of these. So you go to the store, you grab one, you come back home, you start jamming, and all that you can really come up with are drums. Where are the funky bass lines or the blissful arpeggios that I saw on that video? Well, you have to work a bit harder for those, and it turns out there's 2 ways to go about it. In this video we're gonna talk about pros and cons of both methods. So the first one is called single note or single shot method, and it's quite simple. And the second one is called single cycle waveform method, and it sounds complicated and nerdy, which it kind of is. So we're gonna start with the less intimidating one. Okay, so we have a drum pattern here, and we have a cool bass sound here. So before thinking about notes, we want to establish some kind of rhythm for this bass. So we go ahead, and with step mode turned on, we input a few notes on the sequencer, like so. And this is not particularly interesting at the moment, because all the notes have the same pitch. But the korg Volca sample has one super cool feature, which is called motion sequencing, which basically allows you to change any of these parameters on a per step basis. And the way you do this is you hold the note that you want to change, and you turn the parameter that you want to affect. In this case, it's the speed parameter, which also affects the pitch, of course. And if you want to be precise and change the pitch as semitone intervals, you also need to keep the function button pressed, which, as you can see, is not super ideal, but hey, I made it work somehow. See, it's a different note, an octave down to be exact. Let's repeat this process for a few more notes. And this doesn't only apply to the pitch, by the way. You can use step motion for pretty much anything in the grey rectangle except for the sample selection. In fact, let's add some automation to the filter. Another thing that I like to do is to play around with automating the pitch envelope. That is great for emulating slides and glides. So this is a very powerful way to make bass lines on this machine. However, note that the low notes are very long and the high notes are very short. That makes sense because pitch affects speed and vice versa. Now, for the very long notes, it's no problem. You can use motion sequence and change the decay value to make it shorter on a per note basis. But if you want a high note to be much longer, you just can't do it. That's the length of the sample, and that's it. So this method is great if you have a particular sound that you really want to use for your song. But there are some drawbacks. First of all, what length your sample should be. A quarter bar at 120 BPM, a half bar, a full bar, and how big that file is going to be. Remember that you only have 8 MB to work with on the Volca sample 2, which is roughly 2 minutes of sampling time, and 2 minutes of sampling time for a whole project is not all that much. So you can't really go and spend, 16 seconds on just a bass note or something. So let's say that you smartly avoid this problem by loading a very short but very high-pitched sample with the idea of down-pitching it in the song, therefore saving space. That's not a bad idea, but remember that the Volca sample 2 is still working at 31.25 kHz, and so when you pitch up or down, but especially down, the quality is gonna kind of disintegrate, honestly. And that's a bit of a problem really, but it's okay because the next method is gonna take care of the issues that I just mentioned. Let's start by asking ourselves, what is a single cycle waveform? Well, according to Adventure Kid, which is the undisputed goat of single cycle waveforms on the internet, a single cycle waveform is a tiny audio file that a synth or a sampler can read and use as an oscillator shape. Let's take a sub bass for example. Most sub basses are basically square waves or sine waves, just like this one. The length, which is represented by the x-axis, will determine what note that cycle is going to play when looped, and that will also depend on what frequency your synth or sampler is working at, but I will spare you the math on that just yet. We're going to talk about it later. On the other hand, whatever is on the y-axis will determine the character of the sound. Anyway, the idea is that you load these tiny wave samples onto your Volca sample 2, then you press function and loop on off on M11, and boom, you've got basically a synth. Let's load some single cycle waveforms. We need to turn the volume down because this is gonna get loud. Now you only hear clicks, not much of a synth sound. That's because we need to activate the loop function. Let me turn the decay down a bit because otherwise it's gonna play forever. Ooh, I told you it was gonna get loud. I'm gonna cycle through the samples to show you what types of waveforms I've imported. 2 bits saw wave, 3 bits sine wave, a custom waveform, another Nintendo sounding waveform, an organ type waveform, another random waveform, and then we have the classics saw, sine, and square. For the purpose of this tutorial, I'm gonna use a classic square to make a bass. But first, some math. Alright, all of these files are exactly 225 samples long. In a normal DAW working at a sampling rate of 44.1 kHz, that equates to 196 cycles per second, which is a G3. Now, the Volca sample works at a sampling rate of 31.25 kHz, but I'm pretty sure it downsamples anything you put in it, so the resulting note should still be a G. Well, it kind of is. It's a slightly sharp G, as you can see on the screen. This probably happened because 44,100 divided by 31,250 does not return a whole number. And maybe the machine had to approximate the number of samples and that messed with the pitch? I don't know, I'm a bit too dumb for this. If you guys have a firm grasp on these concepts, please leave a comment down below. Anyway, this is definitely something to keep in mind when using this method. Cool, let's turn it all the way down 2 octaves to G1 and let's start laying some notes using the step sequencer. Let's use the same step automation tricks we used for the previous method. Automate the filter, put some slides in, in a separate part I'm gonna work on some cool arpeggios. In yet another part, I work on a pad type sound. And I'm probably gonna add 2 more parts exactly like this one and space them together in pitch in order to create a nice big major chord. Cool, all I need now is a kick, some hats and shakers, and a snare or a clap. We solved the problems that we had with a single shot method, basically. Notes can be as long or as short as we want them to be. And also, did I mention that each one of these single cycle waveforms are basically 1 kilobyte? So that's great. But there is one big problem with this method. And this problem is quite specific to the Volca sample. You see, for each voice, the Volca sample actually has a filter, a low pass filter. And you can, decide whether it's open or closed or whatever. But there are no envelopes attached to it. This makes sense because, again, this is a sampler, it's not a synth. So, I mean, it's fine not having that particular function on this machine. But filter envelopes are a major part of what makes a synth sound, especially a bass synth sound. So if you're looking for a squelchy, funky bass tone, this ain't it. You're never gonna get it with this method. Now, before I leave, where can you find these single cycle waveforms, you say? Well, Adventure Kid is, as I said, the GOAT, undisputed GOAT of single cycle waveforms on the internet. I'll post a link in the description box below. It basically gives tons and tons and tons of single cycle waveforms for free, and he's been doing it for years, and I've benefited immensely from his work, so please show him some love. But also, you can make your own single cycle waveforms at sheetsofsounds.com. They have an incredible online editor, it's free to use, and then you can download the files. The ones that I used earlier in the video were actually made on this particular platform, and I collected them all into a folder which I'm putting for free on my website, or as a pay as you want. Speaking of sample packs, all the sounds that you've heard in this video, except for the single cycle waveforms, are contained in my Big Umami Bombs Volume 1 pack, which you can also find at bigumami.com. Once again, bigumami.com. I put a link in the description box below. So that's it for today. Hopefully you found this quite useful or even fun, and remember that you can support me at buymeacoffee.com/bigumami. Here are some more Volca videos for you, and remember to like and subscribe. And yeah, I'll see you, if not next week, the one after that, but I'll see you when I see you, basically. And I love you very much, and it's time for me to just stop talking. Mwah.